It was November 1960, Thanksgiving to be exact, as many Americans sat down to enjoy their feast. Little do they know, however, that their perception of where all that food came from would change just 24 hours later. On the day after Thanksgiving, 1960, journalist and CBS correspondent Edward R. Murrow presented Harvest of Shame, a documentary about the exploitation of farm workers. Although it is over 50 years later, the mistreatment of farm workers today is a mirror image of slavery from the 19th century. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics professes that journalists should seek truth and report it. Most importantly, it states that journalists should be vigilant and courageous about holding those with power accountable, give voice to the voiceless, and seek sources whose voices we seldom hear.
One of the problems with our food system that hasn't gotten anywhere near enough attention is that it's ultimately based on the exploitation of poor workers, mainly recent immigrants in this country.
Recent media coverage of these injustices has helped bring attention to the issue of farm labor as well as to give a voice to the workers. Today, farm workers work for low wages in unsafe conditions, and the media has tried to lobby on behalf of these individuals. In analyzing media ethics, however, writers and journalists reporting on the issue of farm labor are walking the line between reporting and advocacy. For example, the 2014 documentary Food Chains followed the struggles of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and revealed the actual costs attached to our food systems. This organization, which consists of Florida tomato pickers, began in 1993 and continues to push for equality and fair treatment for all farm workers. With executive producers Eva Longoria and Eric Schlosser, the film has been an inspiration for others to act on behalf of farm workers. In an interview with director Sanjay Raul, he said, quote, "To see that the food movement in general looks at health over human rights, that was an issue for me. It's nice to see movements of natural and grassroots, but when they kind of forget the human aspect, that was a little troubling." Raul also mentions a case concerning the popular fast food chain Wendy's, where he found evidence this past January that the company was buying tomatoes from a farm in Mexico that was raided for slavery only 2.5 years prior. He passed the information along to Andrew Cockburn of Harper's Magazine, who wrote a story concerning this issue just a few weeks ago. However, in asking him about the SPJ's Code of Ethics that states, "Give voice to the voiceless and seek sources whose voices we seldom hear," he said,
"I love those tenets. Those sound great and they're super inspiring. But I don't necessarily look at subjects as being voiceless. You know, that implies a sense of victimization. It's like there are powerful stories everywhere, and there are stories you can tell which will add to the solution. And those stories are out there, and they're amongst people who might be poor. They might be subject to exploitation, but they're not voiceless. They have a voice, and they're just looking for ways to use it."
In analyzing the number of immigrants in the U.S. population, data from the 1970 census and 2015 current population survey shows a significant increase from 13.5 million in 1970 to 61 million in 2015. According to the Pew Research Center, migrant workers who only reside in the U.S. for work are also known as unauthorized workers. In 2008, 25% of these workers were in the farming industry, with an additional 12% working in food preparation and serving, 10% in production, and 7% in transportation and material moving. With an estimated 54% of unauthorized workers working in our global food system, it is important to consider the rights of these farm workers. Writer and researcher Eve Turo-Paul detailed the dangerous conditions tomato pickers face in the fields in a June 2015 article for the Huffington Post. She explained the efforts of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and how the organization continues to be a voice for all farm workers. In an interview with Paul, she said,
"The public can't voice an opinion or vote to change things if they don't know what's going on. I find that people react much better when given facts and are told to make their own conclusions, rather than having an author hit them over the head with, 'This is so awful, you must agree with me.'"
She believes that the story about farm labor needs to be told. Instead of resorting to a call to action, Paul reports the facts in order for her audience to arrive at their own conclusions. Dr. Margaret Gray, an associate professor of political science at Adelphi University in New York, co-authored a June 2015 article that details the ethics behind farm markets and how new legislation will pay more attention to the workers involved. In interviewing sources and compiling data for her book, Labor and the Locavore, The Making of a Comprehensive Food Ethic, she said, quote, "We're really seeing a resurgence of a romance with farming through the food movement, and that presentation in the media, I think, has further obscured the role of the farm worker by focusing so heavily and celebrating the farmers." Gray used the data that she collected in interviewing farmers and farm workers to present accounts of the issue of farm labor. She added that it is important to not deceive people when you interview them and to consider all perspectives involved. Gray stated, "You let the data speak for itself. You don't misrepresent your data, you don't sensationalize it, you don't pull out the most extreme examples and hold them up as the typical." Dr. Faye Hansen, Associate Professor of Biology at Oakland University, has also explored the issue of injustice in the fields. One ethical issue she has in teaching about food systems focuses on the alarming concentration of the food systems into just a few companies with vertically integrated systems, because they play a major role in our global food systems. Hansen believes that the issue of farm labor correlates with the question of why is food so cheap.
Workers are abused, and people need to know that, especially when anybody complains about the price of fair or organic food.
Hansen said that it is up to journalists to help broadcast the issue and inform the public about why it is happening. In trying to report the issue of farm labor, journalists are trying to promote change or action through their stories, but use evidence and truth to report the facts. This balance allows journalists to report about the issue because the public and consumers have the right to know. Thus, in investigating this issue, journalists are expressing a more watchdog role to hold those with power accountable.
It has to do with the men, women, and children who harvest the crops in this country of ours, the best fed nation on earth. These are the forgotten people, the underprotected, the undereducated, the underclothed, the underfed.
In giving a voice to the voiceless, it is important for journalists to consider the line between reporting and advocacy. Journalists should follow the SPJ's Code of Ethics and simply seek truth and report it.
Somos tal vez una gotita de agua, y una gotita de agua rompe rocas.